recording. Okay, there it says recording in progress. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Eleanor van Gerven. On behalf of the Dutch National Knowledge Centre, I'd like to welcome you to a very special session webinar presented by Professor Del Siegle, professor at the University of Connecticut. I heard him speak several times, but at least the last time was this summer. And I was so impressed that I thought if I ever have the opportunity for a webinar for the Knowledge Center, I want to have him. And one of my friends made it come through. So it's a bit of a dream come through. Del, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and take us along in your lecture on shifting through the essentials of gifted education for talent development, separating the wheat from the chaff.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. I was just really honored that you asked me to speak. So I'd like to share a little bit. This is the view this morning from my office. I understand it's, 4 or 5 in the afternoon there. It's 10 in the morning here. And we had a little snowstorm yesterday. And so we are below freezing, and we have lots of snow drifts and ice right now. So you're lucky to have some sunshine, I understand, today. So I'm really glad to be joining you. I never started out in the world to be a professor. I'm a professor here at the University of Connecticut. I'm fortunate enough that I studied with Dr. Joe Renzulli, and I'm even more fortunate that I now have inherited his office and his endowed chair, and so we're able to continue the great work that he started here at the University of Connecticut. But I started out in the world to be a photographer, not a professor. And when I was 18 years old, I was told that someday I would be blind. I have an eye disease called keratoconus. My mother didn't think it was such a good idea for me to become a photographer with the prospect of being blind out there. But being an idealistic 18-year-old, I went ahead and entered the world of photography, and I was fortunate that I had sufficient skills that I could work as a photographer right out of high school. So I worked in photography for 8 years, and then I started to go blind. And brides are a little fussy about their wedding pictures, and you can call it soft focus if you want, but blurry pictures are blurry pictures, and this is before we had the auto-focusing cameras, and so I needed to look for another option. And so at the age of 26, I went to college for the first time, and I went to college to become a teacher. In the process, I had my first corneal transplant, and I went from totally legally blind to having perfect vision, which is pretty amazing. So I tell that story because I'm very thankful for people who donate tissue and who sign organ donor cards. So without that option, I today would not have any vision at all. And so I'm really just very fortunate. So I went to college at 26, and one of the very first classes I took was a class in school health with a man named Dr. Alterowitz. And Dr. Alterowitz asked us how many of us planned to pass the class. And of course, all of us raised our hands. Then he asked us how many of us planned to earn an A in the class. That's the top grade. And I didn't raise my hand because I had been somewhat of a mediocre student in high school. Some might say that I was an underachiever. I did all right. I passed my classes, and everyone seemed to be happy with me. And nobody really expected too much from me. So I didn't raise my hand. And then he said, how many of us plan to graduate summa cum laude? Well, I didn't even know what summa cum laude was, and no one raised their hands. And then he said, why not? He says that we have 3 obligations in the world, and that each of us has the 3 obligations. The first obligation is that we have an obligation to develop the talents that we were given. Whatever talent we have an obligation to develop it to its fullest potential. The second obligation, he said, we have is that we have an obligation to pass on what you've learned. So if you figured out a way to do something, please share it with other people so that it doesn't die with you. And the third obligation, he said, we had is that we have an obligation to leave the world better than we found it. This happens to be a stitched satellite image this morning of where you are. I went out onto the internet and captured an image. This is about a half hour ago, what the Earth looked like. Anyway, and then Dr. Alterowitz said, That's what being an educator is all about. Being a teacher is leaving the world better than we found it. And we do that by passing on what we've learned, passing on this knowledge, not only the knowledge that we've learned, but the knowledge that centuries of people have learned. And finally, being a teacher is all about developing talent. And that not only is about developing our talents, but by developing our students' talents. So I thought, all right, why not summa cum laude? And 4 years later, I walked across the stage summa cum laude, which at this university happened to be the highest grades. And that's actually how I got into gifted education, because when I went out looking for a teaching job, they said, he graduated summa cum laude, he can work with gifted children. Now, it's not necessarily true that graduated summa cum laude makes you qualified to work with gifted children, but I hit the ground running and went out and tried to find a lot of classes and learn about gifted education, and that's how I ultimately became connected here with the University of Connecticut, and where I ultimately got my PhD in that. So this area of talent development, which is what we're talking about here. Talent development is a two-step process. We have to provide opportunities for talent to surface, and then we must provide services to develop that talent. And we need both steps, because for a lot of children in the world, they have not been given opportunities for their talent to surface. Sometimes it's because of poverty. Sometimes it's because they might speak a language other than the language that we teach at school. They might have been just happened to be taught a different language. There are a lot of reasons why kids haven't been given opportunities. So a big piece of what we need to do as educators and as psychologists is make sure that we can provide opportunities for talent to surface, and then by exposing kids to a lot of things. And then we have to provide services to actually develop that talent. So what I'm talking about is we need to become talent scouts searching for points of promise. And I like that phrase, that we're out there searching for points of promise. We've been doing a number of studies here at the University of Connecticut where we've tried to develop learning activities so that when the students do those learning activities, they reveal their gifts and their talents. So we're all about trying to be a talent scout searching for points of promise. Unfortunately, in the US and often across the world, we tend to be deficit detectives. So in the United States, often we'll have a very talented kid, but we won't provide services for that student because there might be some deficit. So we have this child that's really brilliant, but happens to maybe have limited English. And so we say, well, they wouldn't be able to do well in our gifted services because of their limited English. We might have a student who's a brilliant mathematician, but their reading skills aren't very well. And we say, well, their reading skills aren't very well. We shouldn't be providing services, gifted services. So that's the total wrong thing. We do not want to be deficit detectives. We don't want to be finding reasons for kids not to be gifted. We don't want to find reasons for not providing services for kids. What we need to be doing is talent scouts searching for these points of promise, because by searching for those points of promise, we will find it often and we'll develop much more talent. So we do this by providing opportunities and by recognizing students' strengths and interests. So I'll talk quite a bit this afternoon about strengths and interests. In the US, we spend a lot of time identifying students as gifted, and we spend some time developing students' gifts. You know, unfortunately, right now in the US, we're kind of caught in this trap where we're really troubled by the number of underserved students that we have, and we're trying to find more equitable ways to identify kids. And so we're spending a lot of money identifying students as gifted. And in fact, we have some school districts that spend all of their money identifying students and then no money to provide services for the giftedness, which is simply crazy. In my state here of the University of Connecticut, for example, our state law says that every school must identify students who are gifted, but the state law does not require that they do anything about developing their talents, which is really silly. So what's the point? So what we have to do is, I think we need to spend a little less time worrying about identifying students as gifted and spend a lot more time developing students' gifts. And so the reason for this, it's the servicing of the gifts and talents that makes a difference in children's lives, and the benefits that talent brings to them and to society. So what I'd like to talk about are what I think are three services, three necessary services for developing students' gifts. And so I like to call these the three legs of talent, three gifted education services. And I equate it to like a three-legged stool. So one of those legs is that we need to be providing access to advanced content. A second leg is that we need to have increased depth and complexity of instruction. And a third leg, I believe, is that we need to be providing authentic learning opportunities for students based on their interest. And as anybody knows, a three-legged stool will not stand without the three legs. And so I'd like to work through each of those three legs with you. So that first leg is that we need to be providing access to advanced content. When I was president of the National Association for Gifted Children, we produced something called the Gifted Children's Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights consisted of 10 things that I think gifted students have a right to. And I would also say that all students have a right to those things. But one of the items on the Gifted Students Bill of Rights that really kind of took off was this right to learn something new every day. I believe that every child has a right to learn something new every day. And I believe every child has a right to learn something new every day in school. And that children do not sacrifice that right because they happen to know what's being taught that day, just as students do not sacrifice that right because they might have some sort of learning disability that makes learning more difficult for them. So we need to provide opportunities so that every child has an opportunity to learn something new every day. But the issue is that classrooms are very diverse places, and every school has kids who are a year or more above grade level. This comes from a white paper that Karen Rambo-Hernandez, Matt Makel, Scott Peters, and Jonathan Plucker did. And they looked at some typical fifth grade classrooms here in the United States. And they looked at the math and reading achievement of the students in those classrooms. And you can see that in that typical fifth grade classroom, about a quarter of the kids are actually achieving at fifth grade level. We have another third of the kids that are probably achieving about a grade level below, and another third of the kids achieving 2 grade levels below. Additionally, though, we have about 10% of the kids that are achieving above that fifth grade level. And what we know from research that we've done here at the National Center for Research on Gifted Education is that when we give classroom teachers opportunity to differentiate and modify the curriculum, they almost always differentiate down to address the kids who aren't on grade level. And that's totally reasonable and noble. But there is also an obligation, or there should be an obligation, to provide services for those who are above grade level, because those students also have a right to learn something new every day. So we kind of have three options to ensure that kids have access to advanced content. And those options are something called curriculum compacting that we're known for here at the University of Connecticut. Another option is subject-specific acceleration. And a third option is whole grade acceleration. So we're dealing with this first leg of providing advanced content. So when I thought about what's the most underused strategy in gifted education, I wonder, what is the most underused strategy that we have with gifted kids? What's the most underused strategy in gifted education? And I thought about it quite a bit. And I decided it's pre-assessment. This idea of determining what kids know. Because a lot of times kids know a lot more than we realize. So the curriculum compacting process is a three-step process. We call it name it, prove it, change it. With name it, you determine what objectives or what are we trying to teach or what do the students need to learn. So if we're teaching mathematics, what aspect of mathematics are we teaching? Once we determine that, the prove it is why don't we pre-assess and find out what the kids that we're about to teach know about that topic? So we might give a pre-test. We might have a discussion. If it were a history or science, you might have a discussion about the topic. And then the change it is, those students who have demonstrated mastery of it, we should provide them with more advanced content or something different. So the name it, prove it, change it. When I was a teacher, I had a young male I was very proud of him because on our yearly tests, he always had 99th percentiles. He always had the top score on our yearly tests. And I was very proud of what a great teacher I was because he was always scoring top. Then one year we were part of a study, and in that study, they decided to give the students a test that was 2 years advanced to where they were to determine where they were as part of the study. When this young man took the test, he was 99th percentile again. He was at the top. So here I was so very proud of what a great teacher I was, and here he knew this material before we ever covered it. And so if I had done pre-assessments, I would have been better prepared to challenge him and provide him with a more appropriate curriculum. We're doing a study here at the University of Connecticut right now called Project Bump Up. It's building up mathematics proficiency utilizing pushing. And what we're doing in this study is we're taking gifted specialists and having them push into the classroom for 3 hours a week during math time and work and collaborate with the classroom teacher. So the gifted specialists and the classroom teacher are collaborating. And what they're doing is they're pre-testing the kids before every unit in mathematics, and they're determining which kids already know the content. And then the gifted specialist works with the classroom teacher to provide additional activities or different activities for those students who have already mastered the content. We're getting some really good results of this. And this is some data that the school provided to us. And so we have a variety of schools we were doing this with last year. And in each school, there's one classroom where this is happening and one classroom where it's not happening. It wasn't assigned. And the blue is a classroom where it wasn't happening. The yellow is a classroom where it was happening. And these are graphs of halfway through the school year on a benchmark test, the percentage of kids who have met mastery, are approaching mastery, and who had kind of exceeded mastery. And so you can see in our control classroom where it wasn't happening, about 15% of the kids, I would say, had high levels of mastery. In our bump up classroom, you can see that we're up into like 70%. So pretty amazing the number of kids who were up at that top level of mastery. We had one school that dropped out of the program, and that's why I don't have errors there. Another school, you can see the percentage of kids in the control. You can see the percentage of kids who are at the high levels of mastery. Go to another school, you can see the kids who have the full mastery halfway through the year, and the percentage of kids in the treatment. You go to another school, the percentage of kids in the control, the percentage of kids where a gifted specialist bumped into the classroom. And finally, another case of the classroom for comparison and the classroom where we bump up. So we see that when classroom teachers have assistance and opportunities, and when they pre-test, and those kids who show mastery are giving more advanced content, it's no surprise you have higher levels of kids showing high levels of mastery. So if you're interested in not participating in this research, but if you're just interested in this idea, Project Bump Up has a website. It's projectbumpup.education.uconn.edu, and we've created 4 short 10 to 15-minute videos. I guess it's 10 to 12-minute videos that talk about how you can collaborate, some videos of the collaboration in action, a video about different ways that teachers can co-teach, and a video on differentiation. So those are free, and they're on our website, and you're welcome to watch those sometime if you're interested. So One option is that we simply curriculum compact. We determine what kids know and do a replacement for them. However, some kids are much more advanced, and so some kids need acceleration. Excuse me. John Hattie did a study of acceleration and found that acceleration is very effective. There's a lot of research backing up acceleration. Paul Olszewski-Kubilius at Northwestern University and a couple of other colleagues, they did a study of meta-analysis of acceleration for the past 100 years. And what it basically shows, as a result of 3 meta-analysis studies, that accelerated students significantly outperform their non-accelerated peers. So if we have a second grader who was accelerated into 4th grade mathematics or 3rd grade mathematics, that student outperforms second graders of equal ability who were not accelerated. The other interesting thing they found, though, also was that second grader who might be accelerated into 3rd grade mathematics isn't any different in the 3rd grade mathematics from other kids who are in the 3rd grade mathematics. And so our accelerated students, they fit right in. Now, there are lots of people who believe that there are social emotional issues, and if acceleration is done well and done carefully and those issues are addressed, then it's not a problem. So we've been doing some work also here at the University of Connecticut on acceleration. We're generally known for enrichment because of the work of Joe Renzulli, but we've been working with the University of Iowa, and we've been doing some work on acceleration. And what we're finding is that for subject-specific acceleration, so we don't change grades, we simply accelerate this student in a given subject, that if a student's in the top 10% locally in reading or in the top 10% locally in math, they probably would benefit by moving up to the next grade or having content from the next grade. And there are a variety of ways we can do that. We can just take a group of students and accelerate them within the class. We might have the second grader go up to 3rd grade for math and then return back to 2nd grade for all the other subjects. But subject-specific acceleration, kids who are in the top 10% tend to be pretty successful at being accelerated. With respect to whole grade acceleration, we're a little bit more cautious. Generally, before we whole grade accelerate, we would want a student to probably have a cognitive score of about 120. An IQ score of at least 120. Doesn't have to be exceptional, but around 120. And we would also want that their reading and math achievement to be at least average level, 2 grade levels ahead. So that would mean a second grader would have a cognitive score of 120 and would be scoring average reading and math at 4th grade level. There are a couple of reasons why we have this criteria, and the students who have this criteria have been quite successful in being whole grade skipped or whole grade accelerated. The reason we want the cognitive score of at least 120 is, excuse me, we don't want to grade skip a student or accelerate a student and have that student become mediocre in the new grade. So we don't want to take a superstar in 2nd grade and accelerate that student to 4th grade or 3rd grade, and then have them be a mediocre student. And so we want some brain power there, to be honest. We want that brain power so that this rapid rate of learning that they've already demonstrated can continue, okay? The second point also is that when we move them into that new grade, so we have a second grader, and at the end of 2nd grade and the start of 3rd grade, we move that student to 4th grade. That second grader already back in 2nd grade was average at 4th grade. And that was before the end of the school year. And so they are right on track in the new grade and might be a little bit above average in that new grade. And they have the mental power to excel. And so they're very successful. So that's why we think students who have cognitive scores above 120 and who are scoring 2 grade levels ahead on average are really good candidates for whole grade acceleration. assuming other factors are in place, because there are social emotional issues and sports issues and lots of other twin issues. We seldom accelerate one twin and not the other. So there are a lot of other issues that we look at, but the minimal to consider a student for this, we think, is a cognitive score of 120 and 2 grade levels above. Karen Rogers, who was at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, noted that not only was academic achievement more positive for grade skipped learners, but also their social adjustment and academic self-esteem were also more positive. And so there's a lot of good data supporting this. When we think of acceleration, it's too bad that we probably use that term, because acceleration isn't about doing things faster. It's about matching instruction to students' learning. The Julian Stanley, who is very known for the Talent Search program and CTY here in the United States, he did radical acceleration with kids, and one of the first kids that he radically accelerated, was in a PhD program when he was like 18 years old, and he was having a little trouble, and he was having a kind of an internal crisis, and he talked to Dr. Stanley and said, "I'm not going as fast as I should be." And Julian Stanley said to him, "The goal has never been for you to do school fast. The goal has been to match instruction to your learning. And right now in the PhD, you need to be doing it slower." So acceleration isn't about going fast. Acceleration is about matching instruction to students' learning needs. So that's our first leg, that we need to provide access to advanced content, but that's not sufficient. The second leg is that we need to increase depth and complexity of instruction. So what is the point of taking this brilliant little person and accelerating them from 2nd to 3rd grade and then providing very boring, uninteresting instruction? There's no point to it. So classroom instruction, as teachers, we need to be thinking about this. I like to tell a story about my wife. This is my wife, D. Betsy McCoach. Some of you may have read some of the research. We often publish together in the area of motivation and underachievement. She gave me a choice when we got married, that I could change my name to McCoach or keep my name, and I decided to keep Siegle as my name. But before we were married, as I was getting to know her, I had recommended, she was looking for a PhD program, and I had earned my PhD actually here at the University of Connecticut, and I was a professor in Idaho at Boise State at the time. And I had introduced her to Joe Renzulli and Sally Reese, and she was interested in doing the PhD. And so she decided to come here to the University of Connecticut to get her PhD. And as I got to know her, I started to worry, because just for fun, she had taken 4 semesters of multivariate statistics, which was more than I had graduating with a PhD. She had read most of the books on gifted education that we had in our classes during the PhD program, and I was worried that she might not be academically challenged. And so we were talking on the phone one day, and I said to her, I'm a little worried that you might not be academically challenged. And she said to me, "Del, I don't want to be academically challenged." And I thought, "You lazy little thing." And then she said something that really resonated with me. She said, "I want to be intellectually stimulated." And that was an aha for me, because I had always been taught that gifted students need academic challenge, and that the reason they underachieve is because they're not academically challenged, and that our job was to provide academic challenge. Yes, we do need to have academic challenge, but what all of us really want is intellectual stimulation. So we've thought a little bit about this, and we think that academic challenge is sort of this quest for mastery, and intellectual stimulation is a search for meaning. And so Betsy and I have thought a little bit about what is the relationship between academic challenge and intellectual stimulation. Because just because content is academically challenging doesn't necessarily make it intellectually stimulating. And you found that. You've probably provided students with very academically challenged material, and they just kind of sit back, probably because it's not intellectually stimulating. So what we found is that too little academic challenge and too little intellectual stimulation produces bored students. They're just simply bored. They're not challenged and it's not stimulating. However, too much academic challenge with too little intellectual stimulation, they're just turned off. They're not going to try it. Yeah, it's too challenging and I'm not interested. What's the point? Too much academic challenge with adequate intellectual stimulation, then they're frustrated. They'd like to do it, but they just can't do it, And our goal is to have this optimal challenge combined with intellectual stimulation that produce students in what we call a state of flow. There was a man, Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote a book called Flow. He was a creativity researcher, and he did a lot of great research. But he talked about this state of flow when time just stands still for you and you're so engrossed in what you're doing that you just lose track of time. And you might think that you've been working on this for a few minutes and it may have been 3 hours. Okay. So that's what we really want, is we want to combine this academic challenge with intellectual stimulation. So then the question becomes, we need to ask ourselves, is what I'm asking students to do sufficiently challenging and intellectually stimulating? And if not, how can I make it that way? I think Sandy Kaplan and some of her colleagues have come up with some interesting ways to do that by providing depth and complexity. Sandy Kaplan came up with this set of icons. And so by introducing big ideas and unanswered questions and going over patterns and trends and talking about ethics of things and having kids learn different points of view, all of those are ways to make things intellectually stimulating. And so there's a lot of material out there on depth and complexity and the work of Sandy Kaplan. So I recommend that you take a look at that. You can also Google her name, and there are a few videos of Sandy talking about depth and complexity, and there's a great little video where she's introducing the idea of ethics and how we embed ethics into whatever topic we're teaching. So there's a lot of great stuff out there. So our second leg is that we have increased depth and complexity. We have intellectually stimulating. So now we have advanced content, but it's intellectually stimulating. But that isn't enough. To make the stool really stand, I think we have this third component that we need to build in, and that is that we need to be providing authentic learning opportunities for students that are based on their interest. We should never underestimate the power of student interest in making learning meaningful. A number of years ago, here at the University of Connecticut, we surveyed our college freshmen in the honors program. So these were outstanding students here at the university. And we asked them how talented they were in music, art, math, athletics, writing, spelling, dance. You see the whole list there on the left. We asked them how talented they were. We were interested at the time in studying some of Carol Dweck's ideas of the different mindsets, performance orientation and learning orientation, or fixed mindset and malleable mindsets. So we asked them about their entity beliefs. We asked them how important they thought ability was in doing well. We asked them how important they thought effort was in doing well. And we also asked them, just on a lark, how interested they were in the topic. And the yellow there are where we had positive correlations between the student indicating how talented they were and the various columns there. So for example, kids who were indicated they were good at math tend to indicate that ability was important. And kids who were bad at math indicated ability was important also, but it wasn't working for them, okay? That was the case for math, writing skills, reasoning. In other areas like musical skills, these honors, academically talented kids thought that, well, there was a relationship between high effort and high performance, okay? But there is one of the columns that's yellow or orange, depending on your screen, for all of these, and that is this personal interest. There's a very strong relationship between students reporting they do well at something and students reporting they're interested in it, or students reporting they don't do well and reporting they're not interested. So very strong relationships. We don't know if high interest is because they do well or they do well because they have high interest. But what we do know is there is this connection. There's this relationship between interest and high performance. So we can't overlook students' interests. Another great quote from Csikszentmihalyi is, "We cannot expect our children to become truly educated until we ensure that teachers know not only how to provide information, but how to spark the joy of learning." And that spark the joy of learning, part of that has to do with interest. Benjamin Bloom created something called Bloom's taxonomy. When I was studying to be a teacher, that was a really important thing. Knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, the taxonomy, and we had to learn that and all our objectives. But in 1985, Bloom spoke at the World Gifted Conference, and he talked about findings from a talent development project that he was doing, and he published a book in 1985 called Talent Development. And what Bloom discovered was really interesting. They were studying individuals who were really good in a given field. So it might be a top-ranked concert pianist, a top-ranked research scientist, top-ranked tennis player. And they sent researchers out to interview these individuals and find out what their family lives were like. And so in the book, he talks about the contributions of family and lots of factors. But as the researchers were coming back and sharing their findings from these interviews, they discovered that all of these individuals had encountered 3 mentors or teachers or coaches in their lives. And the very first one taught them to fall in love with the discipline or the field. So the very first tennis coach or the very first piano teacher causes them to fall in love with playing tennis, or causes them to fall in love with playing the piano. So they cause this passion within this kid. However, the student develops rather quickly and soon outgrows that teacher. And then they need their second teacher. And the second teacher is the one that develops the skills and the discipline. So it's the piano teacher that's all about the scales and the fingering and how you sit. But what Bloom discovered is you couldn't tolerate the second teacher unless you'd had the first teacher. So there was a case of a young man who had piano lessons, and the parents had found an excellent piano teacher, and the kid hated piano lessons and cried and didn't want to go. And the parents finally decided, oh, just bag it. We're not going to do piano with this kid. And then just by chance, they decided to maybe try this nice, sweet little old lady down the street. And she gave him gold stars for his pieces and cookies when he played well. And he just fell in love with playing the piano. And he soon surpassed her and then he was ready for the second one. But without that passion, without that falling in love, it doesn't happen. And then Bloom found that there's a third teacher out there. So for these outstanding individuals, the third teacher is the one that figures out what's unique about them and builds it into what they do. So the third one figures out what's unique about Michelle Kwan as an ice skater and puts that into her ice skating so she skates differently than anybody else. So this has a lot of application for talent development. And I told you I started out in the world to be a photographer. And so I worked in photography for 8 years, and I was sometimes asked to teach photography at summer camps for kids. And that was really fun for me. It was less fun for the kids because I did not know about Benjamin Bloom's stuff here, okay? So at the time, we didn't have a lot of adjustable cameras. I wanted to teach the kids how to use f-stops and shutter speeds and film speeds. And so I would go to the week with these middle school kids, these junior high kids, and I would teach them all about light. For example, I don't know if you know, but as unfocused light, as light moves away from its source, it decreases by the square root of 2. So for example, if you are 8 feet away from a light bulb and you go to 11 feet, which is a square root of 2 more, you get half as much light even though you haven't doubled the distance. You would think you double the distance, you get half as much light, but it doesn't work that way. It works out the square root of 2. And so 8 feet to 11 feet, half as much light. 11 feet to 16 feet, half as much light again. Just so happens that those were the numbers on the aperture ring on cameras. 7th grade kids are not interested in that. They had no interest. I also like to teach them how to calculate focal lengths of lenses. By the end of a week with me, they never wanted to see a camera again or do any photography because I was the second teacher, not the first teacher. I happened to then go into education, learn about Ben Bloom's work, and continue to be invited in the summer to teach at camps. And so now I decided I'm going to be teacher 1. So instead of having them do all the intricacies of how you run the camera, I said, I want you guys to go out and take pictures of things. And their first assignment was to take a picture of people without people and a picture of near and far. And the kids would say, what are you talking about? And I said, I want you to take a picture of people without people that represents that, a picture that represents near and far at the same time. So pictures come in, and one kid gave me a picture of his grandfather. And I said, how's that people without people? And he said, my grandfather has Alzheimer's. He's there, but he's not there. Wow, that's pretty deep. You also get the pictures of reflections and mirrors and shadows, which are pretty common. For near and far, someone took a picture of a pregnant lady. And I said, how is that a picture of near and far? And she said, the baby's really near, but also far away. Wow. Another kid went to our local jail and staged a picture of a hand coming out of prison bars. And I said, how is that near and far? And he said, freedom is near but far away. Wow, really good stuff. And then that kid said to me, but you know, my picture in the jail, it's a little dark. Is there something I could do about it? Square root of 2. He's ready for teacher number 2. So when we introduce new units, when we introduce new material to kids, we have to set the stage. We have to make it intellectually stimulating and make it interesting and intriguing, and then they're willing to dig in and do the work and the depth that's necessary for the kind of learning that we would like them to do. Interestingly, Joe Renzulli's school-wide enrichment model has what we call type 1s, type 2s, and type 3s. And he didn't know about Benjamin's work at the time, but in fact, the type 1s are the first teacher. The type 1s are that we expose kids to a wide variety of activities. They're meant to be hooks to get them interested. And once they are interested, then we provide type 2s and we go into the details and the how-tos of that discipline. And then ultimately, we'd like to do type 3s with very bright kids where they get into an individual project based on interest. So the 3 teachers are very important. 2 things that I really learned from Joe Renzulli that, kind of changed my life were the importance of authentic methods and products and the importance of authentic audiences. So when we have students work on projects, say we're an English teacher and we're working on writing and we're writing short stories for, let's make it short stories for children, okay? If we have them write a short story, we grade it, it goes home, mom and dad put it up on the refrigerator, you'll get one kind of quality. But if we make an authentic product out of it, you'll get a different kind of quality. So we say, okay, these short stories, we are going to bind them into a book. Your students will want to go back and rework their short stories. They'll want to make sure they're the best possible because now they're in a book, which is really important. It's authentic, but we're still not there. And that's where I often made a mistake when I was a teacher, is that I could create authentic products, but I didn't have authentic audiences also. So then the next step is, okay, what are we going to do with this book? We have to give it an authentic audience. How about we talk to the librarian in the city library and see if she will catalog our book into the library for other people to check out, for little kids to check out and read the children's stories. I can guarantee your students will want to go back and rework their stories some more, because now not only is it in a book, but it's in a real book that people check out of the library. So if we're unhappy with the kind of work and projects that students do for us, it's very important that we have authentic methods and products, but also an authentic audience. To tell a story about this, when I was teaching, a book came out called A Day in the Life of America. And I don't want to be American-centric, but what this book was is they asked people in our country to take pictures on a specific day, like June 3rd or something. And so people took pictures, and then the publisher said, send us your pictures. And then they culled through all those pictures, and they produced a book that showed this is what America looked like on this day. It was a really cool project. I shared that with the kids I was teaching, and I had a young man who said, wow, I would like to do a photo essay about a day in the life of my little brother. This was a family who had 2 children in our gifted program. They had a baby a little bit later, and the birth was difficult, and there were some issues, and the baby wasn't expected to survive, and the baby happened to survive, but had severe challenges. And so a lot of people in our little community were kind of feeling badly for the family because, wow, all these challenges. And so this young man wanted to take pictures of a day in the life of this little baby because they had to do lots of exercises and special feedings. And the parents were okay with it. So he went ahead and took pictures. This is back when we didn't have digital cameras. And so I had him use a roll of black and white film, and I taught him. He's in 6th grade, I think it was. I taught him how to process the film, and we went in the dark room, and I showed him how to enlarge pictures, and I let him enlarge pictures, and he enlarged 12 pictures. Some of the pictures were a little blurry. Some of the pictures were printed too dark. Some of the pictures were printed too light. I wanted him to go back in the dark room and rework those. He was not interested. He was done. So now we've got to do authentic products for authentic audiences. So we thought, what do photographers do with their pictures? Well, they publish books like the one we saw, and they also have exhibits. So why don't we do exhibit? These are not pictures from him, by the way. And so we talked to the parents, and they said, yes, you can do an exhibit. He talked to his aunt who worked at the bank, and the bank says, yes, you can put up an exhibit here. Suddenly, the kid wanted to retake some of the pictures. He wanted to go back in the darkroom, reprint the ones that were too dark, reprint the ones that were too light. I couldn't get him back in that darkroom a week earlier. But now it's a real event. It's going to be a real product, a photo display for a real audience at the local bank. That exhibit made a difference in an entire community's attitude because these pictures demonstrated love, and this baby was not a burden. This baby was loved, and the family was cherishing this little person. So a 6th grader can change an entire community's attitude about something through the kinds of projects they do. A couple of years ago, I actually received an email from this kid. He found me, and he said, my wife and I bring up STEP monthly as we raise our 2 boys. STEP was the name of our program for gifted students. Thank you for exposing us to some invaluable experiences at such a young age. I still can't believe I was set free in a darkroom in elementary school. And I love that phrase, set free. And that's what we want to do with learning. Let's set kids free to explore their interests and figure out how we can embed that into the content that we're teaching them. Enrichment clusters are a way that we can do that. It's something that schools often do here in the US, where we take maybe 3 Fridays in a row, and for an hour and a half, we take some topic. It might be plants, it might be filmmaking, it might be circus performance, it might be button making, and the kids work on projects related to that for the 3 weeks, and kids sign up for the project they like. And those have been really successful. So our gifted education services, we have access to advanced content. That can happen through compacting. That can happen through subject acceleration or whole grade acceleration. We make sure that wherever that happens, we have increased depth and complexity in instruction so that it's intellectually stimulating. And we provide some opportunities for authentic learning where we can include students' interests. So we do all that, and then maybe nothing happens. And one of the reasons is that there are some belief systems kids have to have about themselves and the tasks before they're really ready to learn. And some of you may be aware of the achievement orientation model that my wife and I have worked on for a number of years. So I'm just going to quickly review it because this is an important component in talent development. The first is that, before anybody tackles anything, they have to be confident in their ability to perform the task. That's called self-efficacy. Albert Bandura came up with that. Before a student is going to work on math, the student has to believe he or she can do math. So they have to be efficacious. They have to have that confidence. We know for many students, there's a lack of self-efficacy, and that's what keeps them from achieving. Most of our work with gifted underachievers has indicated that that's probably not necessarily the issue. It is for some, but it's not the major issue probably for most of them. Because there's a second factor. In addition to being confident, you have to value the task or the outcome. So you have to believe this is something important and that you want to do it. It has to be meaningful to you. So yes, I could do math, but I don't like math, and so I'm not going to do it. Math is not important for my future. This math is not challenging, so why would I bother? Those are all things we often hear. And so when we look at gifted underachievers, we often find that they don't tend to value the task or outcome. It's not meaningful. So that's where we've got to get the Bloom stuff and the intellectual stimulation stuff in there so that we can make it meaningful for them. But that's still not quite the total picture. So you have to have a trust. You have to believe that you can do a task. You also have to find that task meaningful. But also you have to expect that you're going to succeed. You have to expect that you're in an environment where you'll be supported. Well, I call it environmental perceptions. You might believe you can do math. You might believe math's important, but you might not believe you can learn math from that teacher because she doesn't like you or she doesn't teach well. And so this whole idea that you have to expect that you can succeed, or you might happen to believe that this is not a place where you can be successful. But what we find is that when we have these environments where kids are confident about their ability, when they value the task, and they feel supported and trust the environment is a place where they can learn and grow and succeed, then they engage and they set realistic expectations, implement appropriate strategies, self-regulate, and get the job done. So those factors are really important. We've created a little acronym here. First of all, there has to be confidence. The kid has to say, I am capable. Secondly, there needs to be interest. It's important to me. That's the meaningfulness. Third, there has to be trust. I have what I need to feel supported. And that results in kids engaging and saying, I'm ready to do it. So we call that CITE. Confidence, interest, trust leads to engagement, CITE. I don't know how that will translate into Dutch, Eleanor, but maybe you can come up with a cool acronym to make it work. So when students value a task or outcome and have positive perceptions of their skills and their opportunities for success, they're more likely to implement self-regulatory behavior and apply appropriate strategies for success. So in kind of reviewing the kind of three key principles to guide talent development, if I kind of put this all together, is one is we recognize and value individual differences. That's why gifted education works. And we do that by removing limitations on what students can learn and how quickly they learn it. And we do that by providing freedom to explore passions. So that first thing is we do recognize and value individual differences. The second thing we do is we support intellectual curiosity. And we do that by when we encourage and model creativity and risk-taking. And we do that by helping students understand that they can learn and grow. that you're not just smart, you have the ability to get smarter. That giftedness isn't something that just happened to you. Giftedness is something that you make happen with that wonderful set of skills and abilities that you've been given. And thirdly, we provide lifelong thinking and learning tools. And we do that by providing meaningful, relevant learning experiences and by encouraging problem solving. I'm a gardener, and about 10 years ago, we bought a new house. The previous house was in an area that had lots of shade, and so these are not peonies. These are some stargazer lilies that I grow, but I had some peonies at the previous house, and they were in shade, and they just limped along. They would come up every year. They would bud out. They often failed to open up the blossoms. They just kind of were surviving. And then we bought this different house in another location, and I dug up my peonies, and I took them to the new location, and the new location had sunlight, and those peonies just flourished. And every year I have these massive blossoms on my peonies, and it hit me that when placed in appropriate environments, all living things flourish. And that is true for plants, and that's true for people. Some plants need dry soil, some need well-drained soil, some need moist soil. Some plants need sunshine, some plants need shade. It's the same with all of us. Some of us need a lot of sunshine, some of us don't need so much sunshine. And so our trick as educators and as psychologists working with kids is we've got to figure out what's the appropriate environment, because all living things flourish when they're given that appropriate environment. So my message to you is I hope you will lead a creative life, and I hope you will help young people lead creative lives, because it's through creativity that we make progress. Excuse me. The ticket to solving problems is looking at them in different ways and coming up with unique solutions. That's all about creativity. So help kids lead and help them expect that they will lead creative lives. And that involves taking risks. Help kids understand that it's okay to take intellectual risks, to try something, because when we take a risk and it doesn't go quite right, we learn so much from that rather than taking the safe way. Taking a safe way through everything doesn't get us very far, to be honest. We should also help kids not be afraid to defy the crowd. When 40 million people believe in a dumb idea, it's still a dumb idea. So they should feel free to stand up for themselves. I also hope you will help kids take a second, a third, and a fourth look and see the uniqueness in each thing as well as the commonality across all things. Our country here in the United States, we are really divided right now. We got a lot of crazy stuff going on, okay, which you probably read about and know about. And we need to kind of step back and take a second look and try to appreciate the uniqueness, because there are some common things, and worldwide, there are a lot of common things that we all believe in, and we need to appreciate that. So we need to appreciate what's unique about each of us, but also appreciate what we all have in common. And lastly, I hope you will help kids fall in love with what they're doing, knowing that there's value in everything and everyone. My father was a perfect example of this. He saw value in everything. Unfortunately, that meant he collected everything. So when he died, we had 3 shacks filled with junk, newspapers, tires, everything, because there ought to be a use for this someday. So it was like a nightmare for me cleaning up. But he also saw value in everyone. And at his funeral, a number of people came up to me and they said, when we moved to this town, nobody was very friendly to us but your dad. He just made us feel welcome. And I thought about it and I thought, yeah, my dad did see value in everyone. I never heard him say anything bad about anyone. And so there's something about seeing the value in everything and everyone. So I'd like to finish with a story about Mother Teresa. when she won the Nobel Prize, people asked her, whatever made you think you could make this massive difference in the world? And she said, uh, I never set out to save the world. Uh, there was a man dying, and I eased his suffering. And then there was another one, and I eased his suffering. And pretty soon another sister started helping me, and we eased. And so she said, we can do no great things, only small things with great love. And so the impact that Mother Teresa had in the world was done one person at a time, and over the course of her lifetime, others joined her and others copied it, and she had made this massive difference, but she did it one person at a time. As a classroom teacher, we look out on our class and we might have 30, 40 kids, or if we're a secondary teacher, we might see several hundred kids a day. And we think this is overwhelming. I cannot meet all their interests. I can't differentiate for all of them. But if there's a talented kid that comes to your attention and you do a little something special with them, and then there's another one, and there's another one, we will make a difference in a difference in hundreds of kids' lives over the course of our careers. There was a man who was the chaplain of the Senate here in the US at the turn of the century, not the last one, but the one before. And someone said to him, "Oh, you're the man that prays for the Senate." And he said, "No, I know the senators. I'm the man that prays for the country." But he also said something that's really relevant, and it's also been contributed maybe to Helen Keller, and that is, I'm only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. All of us can be talent scouts. All of us can provide opportunities. We can show kids that we're interested in them. We can listen to what they're interested, and we can provide opportunities for them to develop their talents. So thank you very much, Eleanor. I went over a couple of minutes, but I'm happy to take any questions if you have those. And thank you for spending part of your afternoon with me.
Well, Dale, thank you very much. And just like when I met you in August, early September, late August, I was impressed. And I was impressed because you were the teacher providing us with a passion for your job, but also you were also happy today to take the two other roles of the teacher as well. So thank you very much for putting that all in one classroom, in one session. And for now, I'm going to look at the chat because I think that everybody has been completely out of breath. I hope no one has been holding his breath, but there are no questions in the chat right now. Let's see if some questions pop up. I think this is where I stop recording.